Hi everyone. At the moment it feels like we're entering a period of transition again. We're starting to see some of the restrictions we've been living under for the past few months lifted, and we're seeking God to help us make decisions about what comes next. But as we do that, I want to encourage us today not to get so caught up in the busyness of activity again that we lose all that God has established in us during lockdown. I think there is revelation that we've received and new things that God has started in us that we have to hold on to and grow in so that we can be people who live our lives in God's narrative rather than being conformed to the narrative of our society. When my second daughter Lucy was born, we realised quite quickly that she had Down syndrome. As the realisation of that diagnosis hit, my heart was broken and pulled in many different directions at once. As a father, I want the best for my kids, and I wept as I wondered what kind of education Lucy might have, or whether she would be able to work, live independently, or find someone to marry. But in the midst of all that turmoil, God really challenged me about my own expectations. We got given a book twice at this time called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy, which is full of amazing wisdom and truth in the interactions between the characters. There's this one, in which the mole asks the boy, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Kind," says the boy. In another, the boy asks the mole, "What do you think success is?" "To love," said the mole. And this one from near the end, "I've realised why we're here," whispered the boy. "For cake?" asked the mole. "To love," said the boy. "And be loved," said the horse. As I read through this book and prayed lots, God challenged me about the measure I was using to value Lucy's life. One of the things that Ruth and I grasp onto that gets us through the days we struggle and doubt is that we felt God had spoken to us about the purpose He has for Lucy before she was born. We believe that God has said that she'll be a light, which is how we came to choose her name. I was looking at the value our society puts on our life rather than the value that God puts on our life. I realised that what I really want for both my girls is that they learn how to love and be loved, and therefore know God. It says in 1 John chapter 4 verses 7 and 8, "Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love." I realise that what would make me most proud of both my daughters is if they fulfil the purpose and destiny that God has for their lives. That is the same for all of us. We're all saved by the grace of God for a purpose, and God's greatest desire is for all of us to grow more and more each day into the people that He created us to be. The way that we do that, one of the key things that I feel that God has reminded us of during lockdown, is that we're called to be disciples, apprentices of Jesus, seeking to do the things that Jesus did and obey the things that Jesus taught. One of the key things I've been reminded of recently is that practicing spiritual disciplines is a key part of discipleship, as they help ground us in the flow of God's narrative for our lives and keep us from being swept along in the narrative of our society. In prayer, we build our relationship with God, speaking to Him and hearing from Him. Worship helps us to position ourselves correctly before God and learn to express our love and gratitude to Him and feel His pleasure and love for us. Study feeds us spiritually and helps us grow and become more aware of God's way. Silence and solitude give us time and space to examine ourselves and confront things we often try to avoid by distracting ourselves. Fasting helps to reveal what might control us and reminds us where we need to draw nourishment for our spiritual lives. Contemplation allows God to speak to us in deeper ways. Service helps us to experience God's sacrificial love for others and discover our vocation. And Sabbath helps us to slow down and step out of the noise, distractions and hurry of our materialistic world to find the green pastures and still waters that restore our soul. These things are not easy. They require effort. Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 7 verses 13 and 14 to go through the narrow gate. The gate to destruction is wide and the road that leads there is easy to follow. A lot of people go through that gate, but the gate to life is very narrow. The road that leads there is so hard to follow that only a few people find it. And I've been feeling a bit discouraged this week, feeling that I'm just not making much progress as I try to walk this path. But I think it's because as I practice these disciplines, I'm becoming more aware of some of the many ways that I deny Jesus and how I live, and how much I need his grace to change. In a book I'm reading at the moment called Bread for the Resistance, 40 Devotions for Justice People, Donna Barber says, "We can't change the world without changing ourselves. The crowded road of least resistance leads only to shame and disappointment. The narrow road presses in on us, compelling us to adjust our perspective, gait, and pace. It forces us to wrestle with our pride and confront our impatience, and it brings us face to face with our insecurities. But along that narrow path, we shake off doubts and fears, and we grow ever stronger. There are no shortcuts or cliché bypasses. There is just through, eyes ahead and feet to concrete. Sometimes over the course of this journey, in the fulfillment of this commitment to call, the narrow path seems to demand too much, and the wide path seems a more sensible option. But then too my senses deceive me, for the word is true, and time and experience have repeatedly shown that faithful obedience is the only road that leads to life. Lord, help us to find it daily."